transfer ship arrived without sound, as if it was trying not to disturb the station it docked with. Inside it sat a single human student. He did not press his face against the window like the others had done when they first reached the Academy station. He did not react to the massive structure outside, a floating world of steel and light surrounded by defense rings and docking arms the size of cities. Most new students from other planets usually showed fear, excitement, or pride. He showed nothing, just calm eyes and steady breathing. The human sat in the back row of the transport seat, hands resting loosely on his lap, looking like someone who was simply waiting for a short bus ride rather than entering one of the most elite interstellar academies in the known systems. Around him, other students were talking. There were beings from heavy gravity worlds, their bodies thick and strong, built like living armor. There were tall, thin students from ocean planets whose skin shimmered slightly under the artificial lights. There were insect-like species clicking their limbs in sharp patterns of communication. All of them were checking each other, judging strength, forming early opinions, deciding who would be leader and who would be weak. And then there was the human, quiet, small compared to most, unremarkable in appearance. That made him stand out more than anything else. One of the alien students, a reptilian species with layered eye ridges, glanced at him and gave a low sound of amusement. "That must be one of the soft-worlders," it said loudly enough for others to hear. "I heard they struggle with even moderate gravity adjustments." A few nearby students laughed. Not aggressively, but with clear confidence that they were superior. In this academy, reputation was everything and Earth had none. The human did not respond. He simply leaned back slightly in his seat and looked at the passing stars outside the transport window. Another student leaned closer, trying to get a reaction. "Hey," it said, "do you even understand what kind of place you are going to? This is not a training station for fragile species." Still no answer. The silence from the human felt unnatural to them. Most species responded when challenged, even if only to defend their pride. Silence was usually fear, but the human silence did not feel like fear. Felt complete. The transport docked. The doors opened with a deep mechanical sound, and a wave of controlled air rushed inside. Bright lights from the academy corridor spilled into the shuttle. The structure beyond looked endless. Hallways stretched in multiple directions, layered with floating holographic signs and shifting gravity zones designed to simulate different planetary conditions. The students began to move out. The human stood up with the others. He adjusted his simple academy-issued uniform, nothing special compared to the armored suits or bio-adapted clothing of other species. Then he walked forward, blending into the group without effort, as if he had done this many times before, which, of course, he had not. But something about the way he moved made it seem like he belonged anywhere he stood. At the intake hall, automated scanners swept across every student. Data screens above flickered rapidly as results came in. Species classification, physical capability, reaction speed, threat level, environmental adaptability. When the human stepped under the scanner, there was a strange delay. The system ran twice, then 3 times. A faint error symbol appeared and disappeared too quickly for most to notice. A nearby instructor android tilted its head slightly, as if confused, then moved on without comment. The human simply continued walking. No reaction, no curiosity, no concern. To him, it was just another step in a process. But behind the scenes, something had already been marked in the system. Unknown classification, no match found. Risk assessment, undefined. The Academy's AI flagged it quietly, storing it for later review. But at this stage, no one considered it important. New species often triggered minor glitches. The students were led into the orientation chamber. It was a massive circular room filled with hovering platforms. Around the walls were banners of different Academy divisions, each representing a branch of survival training: combat adaptation, environmental endurance, tactical survival, and apex encounter response. A holographic instructor appeared in the center. It took the form of a neutral humanoid figure so that all species could interpret it comfortably. "Welcome," it said. You have been selected based on your survival potential across extreme environments. You are now part of the highest-tier training program in the galaxy. The room shifted slightly as gravity settings stabilized. Some students straightened proudly at the words. Others flexed their limbs or adjusted gear, clearly confident they belonged here. The humans simply stood still, listening. The first phase, the hologram continued, will evaluate your instinctive survival response. You will be placed in a controlled simulation based on recorded Deathworld conditions. Your objective is simple. Survive. A ripple moved through the group. Survival simulations were common, but Deathworld conditions meant something different. Those were environments so dangerous that even experienced soldiers struggled. Excitement mixed with tension in the air. The alien students glanced at each other, already forming silent assumptions. Many believed they would rank high. Some even looked at the human with faint pity, as if he would not last long. The human remained unchanged. No shift in posture. No visible emotion. Just waiting. The holographic instructor raised a hand. Begin preparation. The floor beneath each student lit up with activation circles. Energy fields surrounded them one by one. The human felt a slight pressure around him, like the air itself was changing shape. For a brief moment, before the simulation fully engaged, he closed his eyes. Not in fear, not in prayer, just habit. Then everything changed. The academy vanished. The smooth metal floor disappeared beneath him. The air turned heavy, thick with heat and moisture. The sky above was red, cracked with distant storms that looked like burning scars across the horizon. Strange vegetation moved slightly even without wind, as if it was alive in ways that did not follow normal biology. The simulation had begun. The Deathworld environment was designed to test instincts, fear response, and adaptability. Everything here was slightly wrong for life. Gravity shifted subtly. Sounds carried too far or too little. Even light behaved oddly. Around him, other students appeared in different locations of the same simulated world. Immediately, chaos started. Some species reacted fast, forming groups. Others scanned the environment for threats. A few panicked at the unfamiliar terrain. The human stood alone in a shallow valley surrounded by broken rock formations. He looked around carefully, not impressed, not shocked, just observing. A distant roar echoed through the simulation. Something large moved in the forest beyond the ridge. Several alien students nearby immediately reacted, their instincts recognizing danger. They began to move away, calling to others, trying to regroup. The human did not move right away. He listened, counted the rhythm of the sound, measured distance without tools. Then he started walking, not toward safety, not toward the group, but forward into the terrain. Other students would later describe that moment differently depending on who told the story. Some said it was confidence. Some said it was ignorance. Others said it looked like someone who had simply decided fear was not useful. As he moved through the simulated Deathworld, the environment tested him immediately. The ground shifted underfoot, trying to throw him off balance. He adjusted without thinking. A fast-moving creature darted from the side, aiming directly for him. He did not step back. He did not hesitate. His body moved just enough to avoid the strike, and his hand struck a precise point along the creature's movement path, redirecting it into a rock wall where it collapsed unconscious. It all happened in seconds. No dramatic motion, no wasted energy, just efficiency. Far above the simulation, unseen by the students, monitoring systems registered the interaction. Survival response. Extremely efficient. Movement pattern. Unrecognized. Adaptive behavior. Highly consistent. But the system still did not fully understand what it was seeing. Because humans were not supposed to move like that in a controlled training simulation. They were not supposed to react like they had already survived worse. Back inside the simulation, the human continued walking deeper into the Deathworld terrain. The air grew harsher. The sounds became more unpredictable. And somewhere ahead, larger threats were beginning to move. But the human did not slow down. Because for him, this did not feel like an exam. Felt familiar. The The simulation world stretched endlessly in every direction, but the human kept moving forward without hesitation. The air was thick and strange, filled with sharp metallic scents that did not belong to any normal ecosystem. The ground beneath him shifted slightly with every step, as if the world itself was trying to test how stable he was. In the distance, red clouds rolled across a dark sky, and lightning flashed in slow, unnatural patterns. Most students would have stopped by now. Some would have looked for shelter. Others would have tried to form groups immediately just to feel safer. But the human kept walking alone. He did not rush. He did not wander. Every step had direction. Somewhere behind him, other students were still adjusting to the environment. Their arrival points were scattered across the simulation, and confusion spread quickly. A group of reptilian and insect-like students had already formed a defensive circle near a ridge. They were scanning for threats, their instincts sharp and trained. A few others were arguing about which direction offered the safest route. And then there were those who were already injured. The simulation was not gentle. It was designed to reflect a world where survival was not guaranteed. But something unusual was happening. In the areas where the human passed, the environment seemed quieter. Not safer in a direct way. Not magically protected, but less chaotic. Smaller predators avoided those paths. Movement patterns shifted away from his direction. Even distant sounds seemed to lose intensity as he moved deeper. He did not notice this. Or if he did not care. To him, it was just terrain. Ahead, the ground dropped into a wide valley filled with broken stone and twisted vegetation. Strange plants with dark, pulsing veins covered the rocks like living scars. The air here was heavier, and every breath felt slightly slower. The human paused at the edge. He looked down. Then he descended. At the same time, elsewhere in the simulation, the first major incident occurred. A group of students had encountered one of the native apex creatures designed for the test. It was large, armored, and fast in a way that made standard defensive tactics nearly useless. Its presence alone caused panic. The group scattered instantly. Some tried to fight. Others ran. Coordination broke down in seconds. The creature moved with brutal precision. Within moments, the group was reduced to scattered survivors. High above the simulation, the monitoring system recorded the failure. Survival rate drop, 12%. Threat engagement success, low. Recommendation, increase controlled parameters. But something else also appeared in the data. A separate set of readings showed a different pattern entirely. The human was approaching the same region. And unlike the others, he was not running away from the danger zone. He was entering it. Inside the valley, the environment changed again. The vegetation became denser. The light became uneven, flickering as if filtered through layers of unstable atmosphere. Sounds echoed strangely, sometimes repeating in delayed fragments. The human moved carefully now, but not cautiously in the way fear would make someone move. He was reading the environment. Every step placed with awareness of ground stability. Every pause used to listen. Every shift in sound analyzed without conscious effort. Then he stopped. A sound. Not loud. Not close. But intentional. Something was moving through the valley ahead. Not random movement like wind or falling debris. This had weight, direction, purpose. The human tilted his head slightly, listening. Other students would have called this instinct. But for him, it was experience. A low vibration passed through the ground. Something large was approaching. The human stepped behind a broken slab of stone and waited. Not hiding in fear. Positioning. A shape emerged from the far side of the valley. It was one of the simulation's apex creatures. Massive. Built for destruction. Its body was layered in natural armor plates that shifted as it moved. Its limbs dug into the ground with enough force to crack stone. Its head turned slowly, scanning for movement. It was not random. It was hunting. Nearby, 2 students from a heavy gravity species had also entered the valley. They had confidence when they first arrived, even pride. Their bodies were strong, built for endurance and impact. But now they were backing away slowly. The creature had already noticed them. One of them tried to activate a defensive tool, but the simulation rules limited external advantages. This was raw survival. The creature moved fast, far faster than its size suggested. The first student tried to dodge, but the timing was wrong. It was hit and thrown into the ground with crushing force. The second turned to run, but the valley offered no easy escape. Within seconds, both were overwhelmed. The creature let out a deep sound that echoed through the valley like a warning. Then it paused. Its head tilted slightly. It had sensed something else. The human, still behind the stone, still not moving. The creature turned. Slowly, it began to approach. Above the simulation, the monitoring system increased alert levels. Threat class: apical predator engagement. Units lost: 2. New target detected. Inside the valley, silence tightened. The creature moved closer to the human's position. Step by step, heavy impacts shook the ground. The human did not run. He did not call for help. He simply watched, waiting. The creature stopped a few meters away from the stone slab. Could sense him now. The air between them felt different, like pressure building before a storm. The creature lowered its body slightly, preparing to strike. At that moment, something changed in the human's posture. Not fear, not aggression. Awareness sharpened. The creature attacked. The movement was explosive. The ground shattered under its push. Its massive arm came down toward the human's position with enough force to break solid rock. But the human was already moving. Not backward, not away, sideways. A small shift in position that placed him outside the direct path of impact. The stone slab was destroyed. Fragments flew through the air. The creature followed immediately, adjusting its attack with frightening intelligence. But the human was already closer to its body now, inside its range. Most would consider this a mistake, but for him it was control. He moved again, a precise step into the creature's blind angle. His hand struck the joint area where armor plates overlapped. Not with brute force, with timing. The creature reacted violently, trying to twist and crush him, but the human had already withdrawn. He did not stay in one place long enough to be caught. The creature turned again, faster now, its movements becoming more aggressive. But something had changed. It was no longer fully controlling the fight. It was reacting. The human circled slightly, maintaining distance just within and just outside the creature's reach. Every movement forced the creature to adjust. Every adjustment created a new weakness. Above the simulation, the monitoring system struggled to classify what it was seeing. Combat pattern: non-standard. Engagement type: undefined. Survival outcome projection: inconsistent. Inside the valley, the fight continued. The creature launched another attack, heavier this time, using full body weight to crush the area. The human moved again, this time closer. A brief moment of contact. His hand struck another weak point. Not enough to destroy the creature, but enough to disrupt its balance. The creature stumbled slightly. That was the first real mistake it had made. The human did not waste it. He moved immediately, positioning himself again where reaction time mattered more than strength. The creature roared, frustrated now. Its movements became less controlled, more aggressive. And aggression in a controlled environment often creates openings. The human used each one, not as a fighter seeking victory, but as someone solving a problem where hesitation meant failure. Slowly, the creature began to slow down. Not defeated yet, but no longer dominant. Elsewhere in the simulation, other students began to notice changes in the environment. Predator movement patterns were shifting. Some areas became unexpectedly safer. Others became more dangerous as creatures migrated. And at the center of these shifts was a single moving point. The human, still in the valley, still standing. Above him, the academy systems began to flag something new. A classification attempt triggered again. This time not error. This time reevaluation. Subject behavior: unmatched in database. Unknown survival profile detected. And for the first time since the simulation began, the system did something unusual. It marked the human as a reference point, not a participant, but a variable, a factor affecting everything else. Down in the valley, the creature took another step forward, slower now. The human stood still, watching it carefully. No panic, no excitement, just calm focus. And in that moment, the simulation stopped being just a test. It became something else entirely. Something the Academy was not prepared to fully understand. The valley had grown silent after the last clash. The massive creature that had once dominated the terrain now stood in a slower, unstable rhythm. Its movements were no longer sharp or certain. It reacted instead of controlled. Every step it took felt heavier, as if the balance of the simulation itself had shifted during the fight. And the human still stood there, not celebrating, not rushing, just watching. His breathing was steady, almost unchanged from the moment the encounter began. There was no visible sign of stress on his face, no shaking hands, no hesitation in his stance. It was as if the entire event had been nothing more than a calculation completed in real time. The creature let out a low sound again, but it was different now, less confident, more uncertain. It circled slightly, but it no longer pushed forward with the same force. Something had changed in the way it perceived the human, and that change was dangerous. Above the simulation, the Academy monitoring system continued to collect data at increasing speed. But now the data was no longer clean. It conflicted with itself. Survival rate projection. Inconsistent. Combat behavior model. No match found. Threat response analysis. Unstable classification. Several instructors watching the feed began to lean closer to the display panels. At first, they had assumed the human was just another low-priority participant. A background variable. Someone who would likely fail early but still serve as part of statistical comparison. Now that assumption was breaking down, because the human was not just surviving. He was influencing the environment. In another section of the simulation, far away from the valley, other students began to notice strange patterns. A group of insect-like students traveling through a narrow canyon reported that local predator activity had dropped significantly. Creatures that should have been aggressive were avoiding certain paths entirely. First, they thought it was luck. Then they noticed the pattern repeated. Every direction that seemed safer led toward a common unseen point. A direction the system itself was not explaining. And that direction was slowly pointing toward the valley. Inside the canyon, one of the students spoke quietly. "It feels like something is clearing the path," it said. "But not for us." Another replied, "That's impossible. This is a controlled simulation. Nothing changes without system input." But even as they spoke, they hesitated before moving forward. Because instinctively, they could feel it too. Something was different. Back in the valley, the human finally moved again. Not toward the creature. Not away. Just shifting position slightly to the side, as if adjusting his understanding of the terrain rather than preparing for battle. The creature reacted immediately. A quick forward motion, testing again. But the human did not engage this time. He simply stepped away from the direct line of attack. Not fast. Not slow. Just perfectly timed. The creature missed. Paused. And in that pause, something subtle happened. The human looked at it differently. Not as a monster. Not as a threat. But as a pattern. A system of movement, reaction, and delay. Like all living things, it had rhythm. And rhythm could be read. The creature attacked again, but its confidence was already fading. Each strike now carried more frustration than precision. Its earlier dominance was slipping into something unstable. The human continued to move in small controlled adjustments, never allowing himself to be trapped in one position long enough for the creature to fully commit. It was not a fight of strength. It was a structure of control. And slowly, the structure was shifting. Above the simulation, the Academy AI triggered a deeper scan. The system had stopped treating the human as a normal participant. Now it was trying to understand what category he belonged to. But there was no category for what it was seeing. The data streams showed something unusual. Every time the human moved through an area, survival rates of nearby participants increased slightly. predator aggression patterns shifted away from his path. Environmental hazards appeared less concentrated in his direction of travel. It was not protection. It was displacement, as if the world itself was adjusting around him. One instructor finally spoke, breaking the silence in the control room. "That shouldn't be possible," the voice said. Another replied, "Unless he is unintentionally affecting the simulation logic. That would require system-level interference," someone else said. "A participant cannot influence simulation parameters." But the data was showing exactly that. Inside the valley, the creature made a sudden decision. It stopped attacking directly. Instead, it began to circle wider, trying to regain advantage by repositioning. But even that shift played into the human's observation. Because now, the pattern became clearer. The creature was not just reacting to him. It was adjusting around him. And that meant it was learning. The human noticed this too. His expression changed slightly. Not fear. Not surprise. Just awareness. He adjusted his stance. A small step backward. Then another. Not retreating. Repositioning. The creature followed, but more carefully now. Less aggressive, more cautious. It was no longer simply attacking a target. It was evaluating an unknown variable. That was dangerous for both sides. Because when instinctive predators start thinking, they become unpredictable. And unpredictability can break simulations. Elsewhere, in a different sector of the Deathworld simulation, a group of elite students had managed to survive an encounter with a smaller predator cluster. They were regrouping, injured but alive. One of them checked a tracking device integrated into the simulation interface. The display flickered, then showed something unexpected. A central activity cluster had formed in the valley region. Not marked as danger, not marked as safe, just marked as anomaly. They stared at it. "What does that mean?" one asked. The device did not answer in words, only in shifting symbols that kept updating too fast to fully interpret. But one thing was clear. Everything was moving toward that point. And that point was the human. Back in the valley, the fight reached a new phase. The creature launched another attack, but this time it was slower, more deliberate. It was trying to adapt, not overwhelm. The human responded immediately, stepping into a position that disrupted the timing of the attack. The creature's movement faltered. For a brief moment it lost balance. Not fully, but enough. The human did not strike immediately. He observed. Then he moved again. A precise adjustment that placed him slightly behind the creature's turning range. Not attacking. Positioning. The creature turned quickly, but not fast enough. And for the first time it seemed uncertain about where he was. That uncertainty spread through its behavior like a crack in armor. Above the simulation, alarms began to activate. Not emergency alarms, but system integrity warnings. Simulation behavior deviation detected. Environmental response drift increasing. Unstable feedback loop forming. One of the senior instructors stepped forward, studying the data carefully. "This isn't just a strong participant," the instructor said quietly. "It's like the simulation is reacting to him." "Reacting how?" another asked. The instructor hesitated. "Like he's part of the environment instead of inside it." That statement caused silence. Because if that was true, it meant the system had misclassified something fundamental. Inside the valley, the creature made another attempt to reassert control. Charged again. Harder. Faster. But its movements were no longer clean. The human moved at the exact moment needed, avoiding impact by a narrow margin. Then something shifted. The creature hesitated mid-motion. That hesitation was small, almost invisible, but it was enough. The human noticed, and he did something different. He did not retreat. He stepped forward. For the first time in the encounter, he entered deeper into the creature's immediate range. Not recklessly, not blindly, but with full awareness of timing. The creature reacted instantly, but its response was now slightly delayed. And that delay was all the human needed to adjust again. Above the simulation, the system recorded a new classification attempt. Result: undefined entity behavior. Reclassification required. but there was no option available that fit. Because nothing in the Academy's records described a participant who made predators hesitate simply by existing in their range. And nothing described a simulation that started adapting itself around one individual. The instructors exchanged looks. One of them finally said what others were thinking but did not want to speak. "If this continues," the voice said, "we may not be observing the test anymore." A pause. "We may be observing what the test becomes because of him." Down in the valley, the humans stood once again facing the creature. Neither of them had fully won control. But something important had already changed. The balance of the simulation was no longer stable. And the human, still silent, still calm, stood at the center of that shift without even trying to announce it. The valley encounter had changed everything, even though no one in the simulation fully understood it yet. What began as a simple survival test between a participant and a single apex creature had turned into something far more unstable. The system was no longer behaving like a controlled environment. It was reacting, adjusting, and recalculating in real time. And at the center of it all stood the human. Still quiet, still calm, still watching. The creature in front of him was no longer acting like a pure predator. Its movements had become uneven, less certain. It no longer attacked with full confidence. Instead, it tested, circled, paused, and reevaluated every step it took. That alone was something the simulation was not designed to handle. Predators were not supposed to hesitate, but this one did. And that hesitation created gaps. The human noticed every one of them. He did not rush forward to end the encounter. He did not step back to escape. He remained in a controlled middle space, where every movement mattered and nothing was wasted. It was not aggression. It was understanding. Above the simulation, the Academy control room was now fully focused on the human's location. Every other participant had become secondary data. Screens displayed multiple regions of the Deathworld environment, but most attention kept returning to the valley, because something unusual was happening across the entire simulation grid. Predator distribution was shifting. Environmental hazards were not appearing evenly, and survival probabilities were no longer stable. Everything was bending slightly toward a single point. One instructor finally spoke after a long silence. "This is no longer just a survival test," the voice said. Another replied quickly, "Then what is it?" The first instructor hesitated. "It looks like the environment is reorganizing itself around one participant." That statement made the room go quiet again, because environments do not reorganize themselves in controlled simulations. At least they were not supposed to. In another region of the simulation, a group of surviving students had gathered inside a rocky shelter system. They were injured, exhausted, and trying to stabilize their position after multiple encounters. One of them accessed the shared system feed, trying to locate safe zones. The map flickered, then updated, again and again. Finally, it locked onto a central anomaly marker. The same valley region. A student frowned. "That area keeps changing status," it said. "First it was dangerous, then neutral. Now it's marked unstable." Another leaned closer. "It's not unstable," it said slowly. "It's influencing everything around it." No one liked that explanation, because influence without cause was worse than danger. Danger could be avoided. Influence could not. Back in the valley, the creature shifted again. It stepped back slightly, as if reassessing distance. Its body language was no longer purely aggressive. There was caution now, mixed with frustration. It had encountered resistance before, but never something it could not fully predict. The human remained still for a moment longer. Then he took a small step forward. That simple movement changed everything. The creature reacted instantly, but its reaction was slightly delayed again. Not by much, just enough to break perfect timing. And that small delay created another opening. The human adjusted his position, not attacking, but changing angles. Every step he took forced the creature to reevaluate its own movement path. It was no longer a direct confrontation. It was a shifting structure of control. Above them, the system registered another wave of inconsistencies. Survival model failure in Zone 7. Predator behavior deviation above expected range. Analysis. Unknown influence detected. Instructors began comparing older simulation records. Nothing matched. Not even close. One of them finally spoke in a low voice. "It's like the Predator is learning wrong," the instructor said. Another replied, "Or like it's learning from something it was never meant to learn from." The first instructor looked at the screen. "And that something is the human." A long pause followed, because no one wanted to accept what that implied. Inside the simulation, the creature made a sudden shift in strategy. Instead of attacking directly, it began circling wider, trying to break visual focus and force reaction errors. It was adapting in a way that suggested higher-level intelligence than initially recorded. But even that adaptation had limits, because every new pattern it created was being read, not guessed. Read. The human was not reacting randomly. He was adjusting in response to structure, rhythm, and timing. It looked less like fighting, and more like understanding motion itself. The creature tried another approach. It feinted left, then struck right, but the human had already moved slightly out of the predicted path before the attack even completed. The strike missed completely. That was the first moment the creature showed something close to confusion. Not anger, not rage, confusion. And confusion in a predator is dangerous. Above the simulation, alarm levels increased again. Simulation stability declining. Feedback loop intensifying. Undefined participant effect expanding. One technician stared at the readings. "It's spreading," the technician said quietly. "What is?" another asked. "The influence zone," came the reply. "It's not just the valley anymore." And it was true. Other sectors of the simulation were beginning to show subtle changes. Predator movements were less predictable. Environmental hazards were shifting in density. Even random encounters were becoming less random. Everything was slowly aligning toward a central behavioral pattern. And that pattern centered on the human. Back in the valley, the creature attempted one more direct charge. This time it committed fully. No hesitation. No testing. Full force. The ground cracked under its movement. The air displaced sharply as it rushed forward. The human did not move immediately. He waited. Then, at the exact moment of impact timing, he shifted just enough to avoid the strike. The creature passed him by a narrow margin. But instead of escaping backward, the human repositioned immediately into a closer range. Not attacking. Controlling space. The creature turned quickly, but its momentum was now disrupted. Could not immediately re-engage. That brief interruption created silence between them. A pause. A reset. Both standing within the same space, neither fully dominant. Above them, the system attempted a full recalibration. But something unexpected happened. The simulation did not fully stabilize. Instead, it adjusted around the human again, as if he was not inside the system, but part of its structure. That realization, if fully understood, would have changed everything the Academy believed about controlled environments. In the control room, a senior analyst finally spoke. "If this continues," the analyst said carefully, "we may need to terminate the simulation." Another voice responded immediately, "We cannot. There are still active participants." But if the system is becoming unstable because of one variable, the sentence was not finished, because everyone understood the implication. The human was no longer just a participant in danger. He was a variable affecting the entire system. Inside the simulation, the creature took a slower step forward. It no longer rushed. It no longer charged blindly. Now it observed. The human did the same. For a brief moment, both stood in stillness. Not peace. Not truce. Recognition. Because something in that moment had shifted beyond simple survival. The creature was no longer just responding to instinct, and the human was no longer just reacting to threats. They were both adjusting to each other. Above the simulation, the data reached a critical point. The system generated a new label, unclassified interaction event. Cause, unknown. Effect, environmental restructure active. One instructor whispered without looking away from the screen. "We didn't bring him into the simulation," the voice said. "We brought the simulation into contact with him." And at that exact moment, deep inside the valley, the creature paused again. Not because it was forced to, but because something in its behavior had changed permanently. And the human, still silent, still steady, understood one thing clearly. The test was no longer just about survival. It had become something the Academy was not prepared to name. The valley had become strangely quiet again. Not the kind of quiet that meant safety, but the kind that felt like the world was holding its breath. The ground was still cracked from earlier clashes, and the air carried a strange tension, as if even the simulation itself was waiting to see what would happen next. The human stood at the center of it all. Still calm, still focused, still unchanged. The creature opposite him no longer moved with full aggression. Its earlier confidence had broken into something unstable. It paced slowly, adjusting its distance, then stopping again as if unsure whether to attack or retreat. That was new. A predator designed for dominance was hesitating, and that hesitation changed everything. Above the simulation, the Academy control room was no longer simply observing. It had shifted into full analysis mode. Every available system was now focused on the valley and the human inside it. Data streams filled the screens faster than they could be read. Survival models collapsed and rebuilt themselves repeatedly. No one spoke for a few seconds. Not because there was nothing to say, but because there was too much that did not make sense. Finally, one of the senior instructors broke the silence. "This is not normal adaptation," the instructor said slowly. "This is environmental response behavior." Another turned sharply. "Meaning what exactly?" The instructor pointed at the shifting data patterns. "Meaning the simulation is reacting to him like he is part of its natural structure." That statement again created silence, because it suggested something no one wanted to confirm. Inside the simulation, the creature took a slow step forward, then stopped. The human did not move away. He did not move forward either. He simply adjusted his stance slightly, as if preparing for whatever direction the situation would take next. It was not a fight anymore in the traditional sense. It was something more unstable, something closer to balance. The creature suddenly made a sharp movement, testing reaction speed again. But the human was already out of the direct path before the movement fully formed. Not by rushing, not by panic, just timing. The creature paused again. This pause lasted longer than before. And in that pause, something else changed across the simulation. Far away from the valley, other students began noticing the environment shifting more clearly now. Predator activity that should have been high risk was dropping in certain zones. Navigation paths that were previously dangerous were becoming unexpectedly survivable. And all of those changes were slowly forming a pattern pointing back to a single region, the valley. One student finally spoke while staring at the shifting map feed. "It's like everything is flowing away from that place," it said. Another responded quietly, "Or like everything is being drawn toward it but controlled." Neither explanation felt comfortable, but both pointed to the same truth. Something in the simulation had changed direction. Back in the valley, the creature suddenly changed its approach again. Instead of attacking, it began moving in a slow circle around the human. The steps were heavier now, less confident. It was trying to regain control through positioning rather than force. The human tracked it carefully. Every movement, every pause, every shift in weight. He was not guessing anymore. He was reading. And the more he read, the more the pattern became clear. The creature was no longer just reacting to him. It was adjusting its entire behavior around him. That realization changed the human stance slightly. Not fear, not surprise, just deeper awareness. The creature suddenly stopped circling, faced him directly again. And this time it did not rush. It held position. Above them, the simulation system triggered another full diagnostic sweep. Error level, increasing. Behavioral model failure, confirmed. Environmental feedback loop, active. One technician leaned forward. We're seeing a loop forming between participant actions and environmental response, the technician said. Another replied quickly, that should not be possible. The simulation isolates participant influence. But the readings did not agree. Every time the human moved, the simulation adjusted. Every time the simulation adjusted, the creature changed behavior. And every time the creature changed behavior, the environment shifted slightly. It was no longer a controlled loop. It was becoming recursive. Inside the valley, the creature finally attempted a different kind of attack. It did not charge. It did not circle. Instead, it used a sudden burst of movement aimed at breaking the human's timing completely. But the human anticipated it. Not because he saw the attack, but because he saw the pattern leading to it. He stepped aside at the exact moment required, avoiding the strike with minimal movement. Then he repositioned again. Not closer, not farther, just offset. That offset created a new imbalance in the creature's positioning. For the first time, the creature had to reset its stance completely. That reset took time. And time was something the creature was starting to lose control of. Above the simulation, the Academy AI produced a new classification attempt. Subject behavior, nonlinear response entity. Classification, unsupported. One instructor frowned. That's not a classification, the instructor said. That's a description of failure to classify. Another replied, then what are we dealing with? No one answered immediately, because the answer did not fit known categories. Back in the simulation, the creature suddenly did something unexpected. It stopped fighting. It stood still, completely still. His body lowered slightly, but not in attack posture. It was observing, evaluating, learning. That was the most dangerous change so far. Because once a predator stops reacting and starts learning, it stops being predictable. The human noticed immediately. His expression did not change, but his awareness sharpened again. The space between them felt different now. He adjusted his position slightly, but this time carefully. Because the rules had shifted again. The creature moved slowly forward. Not attacking, just closing distance, testing response. The human did not retreat. He held his ground. A few seconds passed. Then the creature moved again. A small adjustment. Another test. The human responded with a controlled shift. Matching without copying. Not mirroring. Not resisting. Balancing. Above the simulation, one of the senior analysts finally spoke in a quieter tone. If this continues, the analyst said, the simulation will stop being a test of survival. Another asked, then what will it become? The analyst hesitated. A system learning from the participant instead of the participant learning from the system. That statement changed the atmosphere in the room completely, because it meant control was no longer guaranteed. Inside the valley, the creature took another step forward, then stopped again. The human remained still for a moment. Then something subtle happened. He lowered his stance slightly, not in aggression, not in defense, but in readiness. It was a shift that acknowledged the next phase of interaction. The creature reacted instantly. It moved again, faster this time, but not blindly, targeted. The human responded at the exact moment needed, shifting just enough to avoid direct impact and maintain positioning. No wasted movement, no panic, just control. And in that control, something unexpected emerged. The creature began to slow, not physically, mentally. Its attack patterns were no longer consistent. It was starting to hesitate at micro-moments. Those tiny hesitations were breaking its rhythm. And rhythm was everything in survival behavior. Above the simulation, alarms were no longer just warnings. They were system-wide alerts. Feedback loop critical. Simulation integrity compromised. Unstable participant influence detected. One instructor finally spoke firmly. We need to extract him, the instructor said. Another replied immediately, extraction may not be stable in current conditions. Then we shut it down. A pause. And risk losing all data from the remaining participants? Silence followed, because there was no easy answer. Inside the simulation, the creature made one final attempt to reassert dominance. It gathered force and moved forward again, trying to break the cycle completely. But this time, the human did not simply evade. He adjusted in a way that redirected the encounter entirely. Not ending it, not escalating it, but shifting it into a new equilibrium. The creature stopped mid-motion, not defeated, but no longer certain. And in that uncertainty, the entire simulation reached a point of instability. Above them, systems began collapsing layers of predictive modeling. Because nothing worked anymore. Nothing matched previous data. And the human, still standing quietly in the valley, had not changed once. He had simply revealed something the Academy was not prepared to understand. That survival was not always about strength. Sometimes it was about becoming the point everything else had to adjust around. And at that moment, the Academy finally understood the truth forming in front of them. The test was no longer measuring him. He was measuring the test itself.